Hello and good evening. Wow, that was a little bit of a hurry. I made a commitment a few weeks ago that I'll be on time every day, but this does seem like a difficult possibility for me. What just happened now was I got docked out. So it was quite some rush to get myself in. Whew. So nice. Anyway, we shall start. I made it on time. Life conspires against me. Okay. So first of all, I always like to start with a meditation. So that's what we shall begin with. I'm just going to turn my light down a little bit. My whole fringe is glowing. So when I do a meditation, I always like to make it clear that this isn't about you becoming enlightened. That's what the mind likes to think. It's like, I'm going to do this and I'm going to become something. It loves that. Whereas actually that's not true, because who would become enlightened and where is enlightenment? Like this idea of this place that you're going to get to. It's like somewhere over a rainbow, way up high. Like enlightenment is a concept that we're sharing in. It's not a reality. And then the mind likes to fantasize like, I am going to become enlightened. Me, Sir Thomas Richard III, is going to become enlightened. So the meditation isn't about you becoming enlightened. Because who becomes enlightened? So the meditation for me, it's the human, so the body-mind mechanism doing an activity in order to relax itself. However, meditation isn't always relaxing for everybody. So if you find that your mind begins to get really busy, then you might want to do something else like yoga or something to relax more. On your bed, easy. Yeah. But okay, so the meditations that I recommend are different ones that I've learned over the years, particularly from the Buddhist organization that I used to be involved in. So the first one is the mindfulness of breathing. And this is basically just counting your breath every time you keep breathe in. So on your bed, easy. So when you breathe in, you count 1, then you breathe out. Next breath in, 2, and all the way up to 10. So all the way up to number 10. And then, that's the trick to it, you start again. So then you just go back to number 1. And it's just about focusing the mind. So rather than the mind being very distracted and overrun by the thoughts, it's about focusing the mind. Number 2 is putting your attention in I am a consciousness. Basically, that means to me like a present moment. So putting your mind in that which is looking, or that sense of being. So the personal attention moves its attention to these two. It obviously can't when you really break it down and reflect on it, but there can seem to be an activity of a person moving its attention to consciousness, or the I am. Obviously, if you really reflect on it, you can't put your attention in consciousness because you already are in consciousness. And what reference point would you find? But there seems to be this mechanism of the consciousness looking around it. It's consciousness. That's still something happening in a dream. In the dream, there's still something that witnesses that. There's still something that knows that. But there can be that activity where it's like the mind turns around and looks at itself. And then number 3 is just doing whatever you want. So just sitting there with your eyes shut and letting your mind go wherever place it wants. The Buddhists used to call it just sitting, which is appropriate unless you're standing, and then it would be just standing. Yeah, so those are the 3. So when we're doing the meditation, I'm going to have to disappear again and get Khaleesi a chew because she's very agitated, and get my headphones, which is something I always forget, but just carry on meditating, and I'll turn my volume off so it doesn't interrupt you in any ways. Yes. Okay, so I'm now going to hit my big gong. Okay, so shut your eyes and begin. Hello. Good evening. Yeah, so I have a few announcements before we begin. On my website, if you go to events page, there is a Zoom meeting happening on the 13th of October. It's free, but I have to say that it's free because it's a trial. So I put it really honestly on the tickets that it's a trial because I want to see if I can do the Zoom meeting without a host. And I've never attempted to do a Zoom meeting by myself before. And the only way I can do it is trial and error. I think I can. Yeah. So if you'd like to sign up, you have to go onto my website and put your email in, and then you get sent a Zoom link and a ticket, but it's for free and there's limited spaces. Yeah. That's on Saturday the 30th of October. What else? That's all, I think. Oh yeah, last couple of weeks ago I've been promising that I'm going to do a retreat next year, but I gave up the idea because I decided I was putting myself too much at financial risk. Yeah, because I'm unvaccinated, and I think that the governments are going to really clamp down on people that aren't vaccinated. That's my projection. So yeah, I didn't want the financial risk, and I didn't want the burden of people booking a retreat and then not knowing if I could actually hold it. So until this kind of like really leveled out, to just wait and see. That is all the announcements. Okay, let's begin. What is the title of the talk? If you want to ask questions, then my Skype address is LisaCairns12. So just send me a friend request now, and you can either write in or you can call, but wait for me to call you. So just put call me and then I'll call you when I'm ready. Okay, I've forgotten the title of the talk. The title is The Concept of Free Will. A concept of free will. Okay, so we're going to focus on free will tonight. Very good. Well, I would like to get my footrest. Somehow ended up far away. Excuse me. A second. So most of you would think that that was my free will to enact that behavior then. So I chose to go and retrieve my stool to put my feet on. So Lisa is a separate entity inside the body trying to get her stool. So enacting free will to get her stool. But the question is do we actually have free will? And that's actually a rhetorical question. It can't be answered. If I was pushed, I would say no, but that's only because people believe that they do. But really, like, the workings of this universe is totally mysterious. And no or yes are not really the answer. It's like way more intricately complex than that. But I would say no, because in the world of language and our way of speaking about things, I would say, how could anything be separate, acting independently? So we all have this concept that we're made up of particles. So we have a concept that if we zoom in to, say, me, for example, into my body, that you wouldn't actually find something called skin. You would get into like smaller and smaller detail, and eventually you'd come to particles, and then it would get smaller and smaller. And you'd eventually get to quarks, and then inside quarks, they haven't discovered anything, so then you'd get to nothing. So we know that we can't say we've ever experienced it, but we've been told by science that this whole world is made up of particles. And then when we look deeper into these particles, there isn't anything inside of them, which is really mind-boggling. And then there's also ideas in quantum physics that particles exist in all possibilities until they're looked at. Which is mind-blowing and fantastic. They exist in all possibilities until they're looked at. What does that mean? We do not know. So if we are all made up of particles, everything is made up of particles, these tiny, 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 tiny things that we can't even see with our eye, and we're all made up of the same, then there isn't actually independent entities moving. Like, so what's moving my body is particles, but then actually, is it particles? Like, what moves the particles? We don't really know. Like, we can't find the life source. But like, if you can't find a definite edge of me, like, where is this person that is moving independently? So that's one way of looking at it. Like, when you zoom into me, you can't find my edge. You can't find my start and my end. Like, scientists are even saying that they don't know what life and death is. They can't discover that. We have like brain dead, what we call brain dead, and the lungs stop moving, but they don't know what life and death is, like when they really zoom into it. So if we then look into time, which you've got to remember, time is only an imagined thing. We only ever have the now, this moment, and then we imagine something called time. So time isn't a fixed thing that's definitely happened. We don't know it's happened. We just know the image of what's happened. And it could be that all our brains are giving different stories as to what's happened. I mean, that's what they say. They say that when we have like heightened emotions, our brain only remembers something like 50% of what actually happened. So the heightened emotions like dilute it by 50%. It changes our memory of it. And we all know when we compare our memories to other people, there is some sort of like collective consensus. But when we really explore the details, we find out, oh, hang on, we remember it we remember it in different ways. There isn't actually a fixed past. If there was a fixed past, why hasn't a scientist discovered how to grab hold of that past and bring it to the future and be like, here is the past? Why can't we look at the past? You might be able to look at images on your camera, but that again is a camera that exists now and it's only images. But then if we look in time, in this fantastic magical thing that we call the past, the way that time seems to work and the way that we talk about it and theorize about it in modern culture is that one thing leads to another. So we have this idea of evolution, that things evolved, life evolved. We have the idea of this big bang and the universe is expanding. So we have this idea of evolution, that one thing leads to another, that because of the Ice Age, then this new age took part, and then because this existed, and that formed and grew into this. So in the memory of our past, we have this linear past where it's one thing to another, to another, to another, to another, to another. So again, if that is true, where does an action begin? Where does action start and stop? Which is also mind-blowing. And it's also total forgiveness when you look at it like this. Like total forgiveness. Because when does an action start and stop? So trauma therapies are beginning to look and study and explore this about inherited trauma. That we all have like a lot of inherited trauma. And if that's the case, which it seems to be, that things lead from one thing to the other, then it means that nobody's really responsible for their actions because they are a succession of many events and a possible occurrence and collection of these events that we couldn't possibly pull out and say this is yours and that's not yours. So they did this experiment on rats, and I don't believe that we have the right to experiment on animals, and I'm sorry that I'm passing this information on. I just want it to become with a disclaimer that I am against experimenting on animals in every form, no matter what. No argument is good enough. But they did this experiment on rats where they traumatized the mother by, say, a pencil. I can't remember what the object was. And then the mother rat got pregnant and had babies. And then they didn't traumatize the babies in any way. But as soon as they showed the pencil to the babies were all afraid of the pencil. And I noticed this with like a Khaleesi and with cats. You know how you see these videos of cats that are afraid of cucumbers? It's actually, I think, because they think it's a snake. Because dogs and cats should have this information in their body that object isn't good to be around. So like Khaleesi is kind of like scared of like certain objects that look like that. But in cats, like the cucumber, if you ever look it up on YouTube, like they totally freak. And it's because they think it's a snake, I project. And so you could say that's a passed on trauma. So all of us are acting out what's come in our genetic history. And our genetic history goes all the way back to the Big Bang. Like our genetic history is only here because that first bacteria or virus bacteria existed in the water and then grew into all these multiple animals. So we also like have the history of fishies, but animals that came before us. I mean, they even say that we've got our reptilian brain, like when we're functioning from our reptilian brain. It's kind of cool and funky. So what does that mean for us in every moment? Does it mean that we're off the hook for everything we've ever done? Absolutely. A lot of our suffering comes from what we should or shouldn't do. And everyone is a product of that. It doesn't mean that we don't punish people, because that's just the way that our society works. In my preferred society, it would be, rather than punishment, it would be like really supportive and non-shaming, and we'd call it like reform or something. I think they try to say jail is rehabilitation, but it's totally not. But the only way we can really rehabilitate someone is by firstly understanding their traumas, and that person being interested in their traumas and their particular conditions and habits, and then also learning about non-duality. Like, I don't believe that you can properly like heal the person without knowing non-duality, like really seeing that that's not you. When you believe it's you, then you're involved in this crazy thinking of should and shouldn'ts, and I'm guilty and they're guilty, and this blaming. I can't bear to read the newspapers because there's so much finger pointing, and really all of it's down to trauma and down to genetic makeup and what's happened in your family line, and none of it's wrong or right. You couldn't help that in any way. Could you, my dear Khaleesi? Huh? You could not help that. Like, parents are going to be bad parents only because that was the way they were raised, and then they'll pass it on to their children. And very few stop and break that line. Like, most of the time people get fixated on blaming and pointing the fingers and being the better person and being the good person and being the superior person. So that's that. And then we have the next perspective of consciousness and I am. So the thing that I find with the consciousness teaching and the I am teaching is that I love it, and it makes it so much easier to communicate. In the beginning, I used to communicate about there being no self and this is it and the beingness. Nothing and everything, which is a beautiful way to communicate, but this, I think, makes it easier. But then eventually there comes a point when you realize there is no consciousness and there is no I am. There is simply what is happening, which is what you are. But we start off with the consciousness part. So with the consciousness part, like, what is it in this moment that is creating action? Like, where is a thought and impulse coming from? So we've looked in time, so we could say that thought and that impulse comes from a parent timeline. So it comes through a pattern of that parent timeline. But what about in this moment? Where are your thoughts and impulses coming from? And when you really reflect on that, it's so beautiful. Because you'll notice like everything comes from this moment. Like it's not coming from a person or a place. Like you never find a personal I inside the body. So your thoughts about you should do this or you shouldn't do that, or don't do this or don't do that, or they did this or they did that, that comes out of consciousness. So that is consciousness thinking. This is consciousness speaking. This is consciousness looking. And that consciousness isn't separate from everything that is. Like when you really go into consciousness, where is the inside and outside world? This love. So everything you think now is an act of God, is an act of consciousness. It's not an act of somebody separate that's doing right or wrong. It's beautiful. Yes, everything is that flow. Let me just check to make sure everything's working. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, so what is it that's looking out? What is it that's experiencing? Like right now, who is it that's looking at me? So all your wants and your desires doesn't come from a you, you're not guilty of them. They're just a happening. The fears, the anxiety, you've got to be or not be. It's so beautiful. And the freedom is relaxing more into that. What happens when there's identification is there's this ego, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but then there is this identification and this ego grows, which tries to take over the life and say, it's my life and I've got to direct my life. And it seeks to get freedom in time. And it seeks to avoid fear and get to love, really. That's what it wants. Whereas love is what you are. It's never in the seeking or the obtaining or the getting. It is what you are. Yeah. Okay, let's do some questions. So, hello everybody. Remember when you're writing the questions and you want to call in, to have a specific question in mind. So it's not advisable to call in if you want to have a chat. If there were one-to-one sessions that you could book, then that would be the appropriate place. You can tell a little bit of your experience as long as it's related to a question. And try to be concise so that it's not really long-winded, because I know it feels really important, but that's more for a private session. Like more on the talks, it's better to keep it moving. Yeah. Hey, Thomas. Okay, Rob says, call me. Okay. Let's have a go. So, Rob, I'm going to call you. Okay, that didn't work, Rob. Okay, so let's go to chat on YouTube. Okay, so Michael W. So this is on YouTube. On free will. If there's no free will, then why is there karma? Could we say that negative karma is the result of our own ignorance, from which came our misdeeds, which were a result of our will? So hey, Michael W. So karma is an interesting subject, right? So what do they mean by karma? So to me, karma is like cause and effect. So if I hit you in the face, then there is going to be karma from that. If I do steal money, then there's going to be karma from that, whether I'm caught. Whether I'm caught or oh man. Hello. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, I think that's back in now. My video. Yes, I think it's back in. Oh, sorry, my computer stopped charging, and then when I plugged it in, it knocked out my camera. So, yeah, so karma to me is like an action. So if you steal money, then more than likely there's going to be karma for that. There's not going to be good karma for that. It will more than likely be a negative karma. Even though you might have the joy of spending it, mentally, the act of stealing, dependent on what happens, but more than likely, I mean, it could be if you're like in a really desperate situation in a country with lots of poverty, then there might not be such big karma. But normally the act of stealing comes with like lack of empathy for other people, which most probably will come with lots of suffering in itself, because if you have lack of empathy for other people, then you'll find it harder to form relationships, etc., etc. So there'll be difficulties there. So that is karma. It's not good or bad, because the thief that steals the money can't help but steal the money. So if you think about my dog is made up to be a meat eater. So if I presented her with a carrot and a chicken, she's going to pick the chicken because of her genetics predominantly, but then also because that's what she's used to, and so her social conditioning as well. Give me a moment, Rob. I just finished answering this other person's question now. Let me put it onto red. So like karma, karma is something that happens, and we all have our own karma, but we can't help the decisions we make. So if you are a thief, it's more than likely that you're brought up in that situation. Maybe there's a situation where you've got no other choice, or you feel that you've got no other choice. And it's not actually that person's fault. It's a happening. It's something which appears in them. So you could look in the timeline as to tell their story, but also in the moment, it's a happening. It's not the free will of somebody. Like, who is this somebody with free will? They're a set of habits and conditions, and they have no control over that. There can be seeming control, so there could be somebody that seemingly has control, so they go to therapy, or they go to try and change their behavior, or they go on a government program so they can begin to have more skills so they can get a job. So there can be change, but that's not actually somebody. That again is karma. That again is habits and conditioning, that they were lucky enough to have the conditioning to change their current set of circumstances. So karma is life. We all have karma. Like, I think I was listening to a story that had like an Islamic basis, and like a saying that they had is all is God, or all is God's will. I can't remember the saying. They said it was really beautiful. It's like all is the flow of God. And that can't be changed. The freedom comes when you detach from that karma. It's not a you that detaches, but the consciousness that is locked into the person. So it feels like consciousness is somebody's, it belongs to somebody. When that separates, and it's an energetic shift, and then that consciousness becomes the experiencer, and the body's still going to have karma. There's that really beautiful story where I really bastardize everyone's names because I can never remember it, from Buddhism, where there is this guy like Arachnagona. He lives in the woods. He used to be, I think he was a university professor, and then he realized, or he got this delusion that in order to work out a particular formula, he had to go into the forest and kill 100 people and cut off their little finger and wear it in a necklace around his neck. So he did that, and he got to number 99. So he got 99 little fingers, and then the Buddha was going to walk through the forest, and all the villagers were like, "Don't go through that forest. Arachnagona lives in there," and he chops off people's fingers and he kills them. And the Buddha just shrugs, and then he begins to walk through the forest. And Ratnagona is like, yes, my last victim. And so he begins to run to try to catch up with the Buddha, to kill him and to chop off his little finger and put it around his neck. And he runs and he runs and runs, but no matter how fast he runs or how long he runs, he can't catch up with the Buddha. And eventually he says to the Buddha, stop, I can't catch up with you. And the Buddha returns and turns around and says, it is you that's moving too fast. I am perfectly still. That's so beautiful. I am perfectly still, because it means Buddha nature. So then Ratnagona falls on his knees and gets enlightened and realizes what the Buddha says and becomes the Buddha's disciple. But every town they go to, people know who Ratnagona is, and he's maybe killed a family member or people have heard about him, so people throw rocks at him. And the Buddha said, and this is the karma of the body. And that was the karma of his body. I'm not saying that that's right, that's what we should do, but that's just a story to give an example of karma. Beautiful. Okay, thank you, Michael W., for your question. I now move on to Rob. Hey, Rob.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't calling you all the time.
That's okay. That was okay. I just got 2 missed calls, but I was just finishing the other person's question, because when I called you originally, it stopped. It didn't work, and so then I moved on to someone else's question. So I just wanted to finish that rather than keep flitting over.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
It's
nice.
Take you off video onto voice, don't I?
Sorry?
Is it okay? Is it okay as it is there?
Yes, everything is good.
Oh, cool.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I had a question about the whole subject of non-duality when over a period of years I've experienced going in and out of realization or a good place, and it's when I've come to a place recently of just like you have mentioned it before, of like hopelessness, like all the teachings become sort of meaningless, and
yeah, that's a really painful place to come to. It's really painful, that hopelessness.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to know that you've got your camera on. I just saw your nose, just so you don't feel invaded that I'm looking at you. But I mean, most of it's black. But
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then
it's really painful.
Yeah.
It's one of the most hardest places to be at, that hopelessness. It's actually a feeling in the solar plexus, so that's where it originates from. And its opposite side is that I can do it. And it's not necessarily suffering until seeking gets involved in it. Because it's appropriate sometimes to realize that you can't do something. Maybe when it goes into hopelessness, it goes into seeking. But it's appropriate to realize that feeling, sometimes when you have to give up and you can't do something. So that's a normal human feeling. But then we get invested in that, and our identity becomes having stories to live for. Like, what is it that you're living for day to day? And the freedom comes when you're just living for the moment. You're just living for what's happening right now, nothing more. But most of the time people need something to live for, whether it be kids, whether it be to earn money in the future, whether it to be successful, whether it to be good, or whatever story it is, because the consciousness is identified with the person, and their belief or their dynamic is that feelings are happiness, and feelings are affected by the pleasures that I receive from outside, so, or stories that I tell myself about who I am or what I am. So, and those stories affect my feelings in the end. And we believe that happiness is about having positive feelings. So freedom is about having positive feelings, where it totally isn't. Freedom is about this energetic shift and this movement back into consciousness, which is stillness. And then the feelings oscillate in that, dependent on your karma of that body. And there's nothing wrong with all range of human emotions. None of them are unenlightened. I mean, there isn't really something as enlightenment and unenlightenment. It's just what happens is when the consciousness identifies with the person, then they become seeking to find happiness in the feelings. And this, to me, becomes suffering. When you are seeking to find happiness in your feelings, whereas really happiness is in the stillness of what's looking now. But that isn't a story. That can also become a story of hope for somebody. And so it's the solar plexus, which has maybe been overutilized in the past and oscillates between feeling hopeful and feeling hopeless. Also in the solar plexus is repressed anger, which adds to all of this. So repressed anger, and it goes that you repress your anger, so you repress your emotions, and then that anger turns into depression. It turns into frustration, and the frustration turns into depression. It's like a suppression of this very fiery energy. Like anger is an appropriate human emotion. It's not appropriate to act out on people, but it's actually, like in Chinese medicine, they called it like fire, the fire that gets the food kicking, the fire that gets cooking, the fire that gets the body working. But the suffering comes put aside the suffering, so I just carry on with this. And the reason that we suppress emotions often is because our identity doesn't match up with what's happening externally. So we've got this idea of ourselves, and then we've got this idea of what we want to project. So then it's like a lot of our problems are actually relational problems with people. So it's like when we're in relationships, we're unable to express ourselves. But even when we're by ourselves, it can be like that. We often don't know our emotions, but that's how it begins, is that we're unable to express ourselves, and it's unsafe for us to express ourselves, and then we repress them, and then often we forget them. So we cut off a part of ourselves and we push it down. So this is what the solar plexus does, and then often that can turn into hopelessness, like it all gets muddled together. So you've got the two oscillating between hopeful and hopeless, and then you've got this repression of emotions, which is anger and frustration, and then depression. And the actual key to it is the recognition that that's not who you are, the recognition of consciousness. But sometimes these emotions and this energy is too intense, and so when they get triggered, the consciousness is automatically identified again with the person, and then there is a seeking in time. So it's then when you experience the in and out. So then when that happens, there has to be an exploration of what's happening in that area, because there's obviously intense emotions in there. So you have to explore that area and what's happening in it. How does that feel?
Yeah, that's exactly. You described exactly what it is. Yeah, and it's exactly.
Yeah, I think that, like, from working with you a few times, we haven't worked very much. I would suspect that you have problems boundary setting. And I do have reasons for saying that, but I won't say it. Like there is things that I noticed in our sessions. And what that means is being able to express how you feel to other people. And able to express them what you want and what you don't want from them. You might not even really know what it is that you want and what you don't want from them. And so therefore it'll be in relation that you get triggered again into this feeling. And I can imagine that if this is true, this is just a hypothesis, saying that word right? If that is true, then what it will do is eventually, the more you do that, it will begin to make you feel very hopeless. Because relationships is the fundamental of a society. And if you feel like you can't establish yourself in that, and establish your wants and needs, even if it's not a full consciousness of it, it will begin to make you feel hopeless. Because it's like it's the essence on the human level of what you are with your wants and needs. Like that is the personality. Like I think it's in Chinese medicine, they also say the personality comes from here. And then in Western psychology, they also say, because wants and needs also come from the solar plexus as well, like this putting up these boundaries. And it's related to anger, it's complex. But in Western psychology, they also say the way the personality is formed is through choice. So it's through you being able to assert what you want and what you don't want. So this is differentiation. I don't know if I say that word right, sorry, it's my dyslexia. Becoming differentiated. So
I'd say differentiation.
Yeah, so that it's becoming that. And that is different from waking up. Like that is like the personality structure. So when somebody's crossing your boundary, you're able to say, no, I don't want that. Or yes, I do want that. And you're able to stand in it and not let somebody else bulldoze you through manipulation or other tactics. So, and most people don't have strong that because we're living in a very traumatized society and it's been passed down generationally. So,
Yes. Yeah. That's
so then
it.
The solution to it is exploring that, really exploring it, really getting to know it, getting to know your trigger points, getting to know what it is you want and don't want in relationships, and then expressing that. Like one of the most important trauma healings is expressing to other people what you feel and what you want and what you don't want, and becoming skillful at doing this, because that actually begins to make you feel more safe with other people, and then you become more defined on the human level. That is not the same though as waking up, but that can maybe help that energy stop being so intense, which pulls consciousness back into the identification or creates the seeking again, which then makes identification. So freedom, like non-duality, is this energetic shift to who you are, which is the boundlessness that's experiencing all of this. When the seeking starts, so that energy in you maybe triggers the seeking, then the consciousness and the personality become intermeshed, so it feels like you are somebody. And that's what you call suffering. And when you're suffering, you feel small and you feel contracted and you feel inside the body. When you feel more happy, if you explore it, you'll realize you feel expanded, and that is because there is less identification with the body. It's not to do with your circumstance.
Yep. It's beautifully put. Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's okay. So my recommendation for it, even though it sounds like I'm giving prescription where I'm really not, because you'll either do this or not do this. So it's not really that you have to do it or not. Either the energy will come up to do it. Ironically, I would explore human relationships for that area. So explore relating to people. And that, I know that sounds really abstract and really far away from hopelessness, but I think they'll be interconnected.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rob.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful to
Cool.
speak to you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lots of love.
lots of love. Bye.
Okay. Bye.
Rob, I'd just like to say sorry as well, because I did actually by accident send give me a call when you're back. That's like an automatic message when somebody doesn't answer their phone. So I'm sorry that was confusing. Like, it really wasn't your fault. You kept calling. But, I love you, Lisa. Fantastic talk. Ah, nice, Izzy. Yeah, there's no questions tonight. If you have a question, then please ask me a question on Skype, and my Skype address is Lisa Cairns 12. If you want to call in, please call me. I will now go on to YouTube and see if there's any questions on there. Malise Matt says, there is free will, but the idea of not taking choices is calming, so people choose to believe there is no free will. Hey, Malise. Thanks for that comment. I actually, on the human level, don't believe either that there's free will or not free will. I will say that there is no free will if I'm asked, but it's kind of irrelevant. Like, really, there is this looking, and then happening happens, and whose will it is irrelevant. It's a happening. The teaching of free will is really important, though, because most people are identified with the assumption that they are the doer. So, like, I don't believe that I'm not the doer, I don't believe that I am the doer. So the identification that you are the doer is a suffering. It's a belief in a thought structure. It's belief in this society's thought structure, and no words can be truth. Words are simply words. However, we do have the appearance of free will. So it appears that a thought happens in the head, like, I'm going to pick up my drink, and then that happens. And that's a human functioning, and I would say that that functioning appears in order to update this machine to make the best possible choice possible. The best possible choice possible. Best possible choice there is. And I would also say that the idea of there not being a choice, people do use that idea as a self-protection and a way to relax. So, like in childhood, there needs to be the defining of the personality, and the personality is fundamentally made up of choosing and the way that you interact with people and the choices that you make in that interaction. So you choose to play with your friend, the way you choose to speak to them. So all these like tiny choices kind of make up the fabric of being a person in the human world. And often people are traumatized in making choices by their parents. I'll give you an example. So Johnny decides that he wants a cookie. So he goes and asks his mum, can he have a cookie? His mum is stressed out and really pissed. So she screams at Johnny and is like, how dare you ask for another cookie? You've already asked for 6 cookies today. You know, what is wrong with you? Like, and she has a go at him. She doesn't want to have a go at him, but she loses her temper. Like with him, he's maybe kept asking and then he sneaked a few cookies. So she loses her temper and shouts at him. And maybe this happens on a repetitive basis with many things. What will happen to Johnny is that he will begin to suppress his wants and maybe suppress them to the point where he doesn't really know what they are. And it could be that if he keeps having this interaction with his mum, that when he gets older, he struggles to make choices. So the ideal way to deal with that, or the better way to deal with that, is for the mother to discuss it with him. So the mother to say, I really understand you want another cookie. I would like another cookie because they're so tasty. However, and gives the reasons. How about we have a cookie at this time, and then Johnny agrees to it. I mean, maybe he doesn't, maybe he has a tantrum, but you have to sit with him through the tantrum. That, what it does is it helps him to be confident in his choices. And it helps him to define what it is that he wants. People can also play passive-aggressive games with their kids where they don't really notice they're doing it. Like he begins to ask for something and then the mum withdraws love silently. Like because she's angry or fed up or exhausted, or the dad, whoever's the main caregiver. There's an element of sexist coming up in Lisa. And so then he begins to suppress it and becomes to be confused by choice making. So ideally what the parent wants to do is encouraging him to make his own choices, not always giving him what he wants, but encouraging him to make his own choices and be able to express how he feels as well. You know, so you could also have a conversation, how do you feel not having a cookie? I feel sad. And that's okay, but that's what's happening in him. Yeah. So then often when you've had this trauma in childhood, choice then become very stressful for the adult because they can't get in contact with what it is they want and they don't trust their choices. They believe that if they choose, you know, the mother or the father will withdraw love and something terrible will happen. So then this teaching can, you know, attract people that struggle choosing, or when you have that dysfunction, it can go to like hyper choosing, like becoming really dominant in their choices, which is equally unbalanced. And then this teaching can relax something. And that's great, as long as it's not an avoidance, like as long as you're conscious of what's happening. So it's okay to relax a neurosis, but you're conscious of the neurosis itself and that you're using that teaching to relax the neurosis. The reason that the free will is taught in non-duality is because there is meant to be this breaking of this belief of this person, that you are this separate, identified person. And it's this going back to something that is beyond choice, is beyond good and bad. It's not about living in these concepts and that becoming a new dogma or that becoming a new belief system, like I have no choice and then going to war for it. It's seeing these lies that you tell yourself, and that nothing is true in our words. Words are something that we made up. They're not our truth, because you and I are also something that is made up in words. They are not your truth, but the choice is like the fundamental identity. It's like you're so convinced that you are the chooser and that you are the doer and that you're somebody that belongs inside this body. And that is not true. Life is a happening. It is happening. Michael W. says, I like this topic of free will. As I understand in the revealing, there isn't a body here, but no one in it. But I like results this topic creates within. Psychopaths can't change. Now what? Oh. Thank you, Lisa. Brilliant talk. Hi, Ida. Thanks, Ida. Thank you. Amy, question. Hey, Amy. I can't relate to what you're saying to Rob about hopelessness, but what if you ask for what you need and it's not met by the other person? I can relate, not I can't. I can relate, sorry. And it's not met by the other person. In this case, emotional connection with husband. Is it a case of acceptance and meeting my own needs by giving myself what I ask of him? Yeah, that's difficult, Amy. And whenever there is something that you desire in this reality, it's like bringing it into focus. So you would like to relate more with your husband and have more of a deeper emotional connection. And just bringing that into focus and not blaming the husband, not blaming yourself. You've done nothing wrong. You don't have to change it. You don't have to like suddenly force him to relate on a deeper level. Because from consciousness perspective, you are relating totally. And that's beautiful. Like when he looks at you and speaks to you, no matter what he says, it's consciousness speaking. It's consciousness looking. So on that level, you are connected, which is love. But on the human level, just keep bringing that into consciousness without any judgment of it. So bringing into consciousness that you want a deeper connection with your husband, a deeper emotional connection, and for you to express yourself and to be held. Because it can be difficult. You marry your husband a long time ago and then you transform and then they don't. I can imagine that is a tricky situation. And then just holding that every day and seeing what blocks inside yourself you have. So not believing it's possible. If there's any trauma that needs to be worked out, like, is he like your parents in some way? So my experience is that when I have difficulty in relation with someone, it's normally my blocked energy, like they're a reflection of myself. And normally when I see that and go deeper into that, something else shifts. And that doesn't mean that it shifts in the person, it just might shift in the way I relate to them, and then finding a different relationship, not sexual relationship, I'm not saying leave your husband or anything, but a different relationship where those needs are met more. Yeah, it is difficult. We are going through this period where people are waking up in everyday society, and that does present more problems because, like, I relate with my childhood friends. Like, we've been friends for so long, and sometimes I just think that they think I'm neurotic because I try to be honest and express to them, and they do. I think that they think it's neurotic. I'm often told I overthink things, like if I try to express myself, and I often find that I hurt them in expressing myself, which is super sad because it's the game is to always be validating each other in a lot of like social circumstances. So you're validating the other person's emotions. So if I'm trying to be more real and honest, they feel it's like a diss of them or something, which it totally isn't. But I keep trying and persevering and presenting myself, and then seeing what reaction comes in me, you know, when they like say these things or do these things, or the way they respond, like what happens in me. And I try to find more delicate ways in order to express myself. But I keep presenting myself, you know, and sometimes they really hear it. Like I try and say and explain that if I can't express myself and my feelings, then on the human level, I don't say on the human level to them because I think I was woo, but I say it makes me feel like I don't exist on the human level, not in a positive way, but in a negative way. It's like being fake, and being fake feels like I don't exist, but in a lonely way, not in a expanded way. Yeah. And I have to take all their projections and their judgments on me and their reactions to that, or I just choose to leave. But currently I choose to keep presenting myself, but they may choose to leave. They get more and more fed up with it. Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Brilliant talk. Oh, I've read that already. Going back to the brilliant talk. Hi, Hassan. Hi, Aparna. When I disappears and I remains as a mystery of life, who knows, free will or not, nothing matters anymore. I don't like to say this anymore, that the I disappears. I know I used to speak like that, and it just doesn't resonate with me so much anymore to speak like that, because I feel like there's so much of a misunderstanding when that's said, when the I disappears. To me, what I like to say is that when the consciousness now, or like life, is identified with the person, because there's always going to be this person, this character that's looked for it through. So what do you mean by the I disappears? Like the I stops being the watcher, or the I stops being the experiencer. But then there's still a character that appears. So still the appearance of someone. So right now there is nothing looking, but as soon as time is thought about, then the character appears, and in a way, everything that's expressed, it's expressed in the character pattern of Lisa. So everything that's done comes from a pattern in the Lisa form. Like even in the way that non-duality is spoken, like I'm speaking spontaneously from this moment, but the way in which I speak is the pattern of Lisa. Like I speak differently from Roger Castillo or Rupert Spira or Umani. Like Lisa's got her own unique flavour. And that's because it's spoken through the pattern of Lisa, but right now it's consciousness speaking. So I no longer like to say this. Like I remember, years back, there's this teacher that I was in communication with and friends with in a way, and we were talking about like how you know the I is there or not, and I began to realize that I really don't know if the I is here or not. Like I don't know what that means. Like how would you know that? And like there's an appearance of Lisa, so there is this Lisa character appearing. It's just that Lisa isn't the experiencer anymore. Lisa is a character appearing. But what does it mean when the I disappears? I think it maybe means like a sucking in of that I and then making that I really dense here. That's how I think I used to speak about it. But as I've spoken more about it and like this is integrated through my body, it really doesn't resonate for me, that way of speaking anymore or teaching. Like you could say, like in this moment there is nobody here. That's so beautiful. But then at the same time that's still conceptual. Like in a way it's like, it's not even there's nobody here. It's just, but there is this character, always this character that's coming and going. Yeah. Thank you, Apana, so much for your question. And I know some teachers talk about the I completely disappearing, but I don't know what they mean by that. And I don't know if I'm talking about the same thing. Like, so I know that the like neo-Advaitins would say that I'm not speaking about the same thing. I don't know if I'm speaking about the same thing. Like in the beginning, because I had been so heavily taught by neo-Advaita, like I felt like I knew what that meant. But over time, like you begin to question all these teachings more and more. And I really don't know if I know what that means. The I disappears. Like what it really feels like here, if I really like narrow down on it, is it feels like nothing is speaking. There is nobody here in the way. Like there's nobody here. It's just coming out. There's no center point. There's nothing which is speaking. There is nothing which is looking. But there's this character that's coming and going constantly. And this expression through this body will always, like in some way, have some form of identification with this body. Like it's like that nothingness that's experiencing isn't experiencing in the wall out there. It is in a way, if you zoom into the moment, like you can't tell where the experiencer is. It's everywhere. But it's like as soon as we begin to get into the language, like it is coming from this apparent angle. Even though when everything's dropped, it's not. It is seemingly coming from this angle. Like, and you can also say it's not. The semantics of words in a way. But I don't know if I relate to that teaching anymore. I remember when I first had the energetic shift, I was like, my God, this makes no sense. Like, no teaching touches this. No teaching touches this. But then when you become a teacher, you kind of you have to say things in order to try to express this, even though you know that the words don't match it. And you kind of get pushed into areas of teaching. Like, it's not anybody's pushing you, but it's like you have to have words and sentences in order to define and in order to teach something. Whereas really the greatest teaching there is and the more that I on the human level has evolved, the more the teaching evolves through this body. Like, the more it's not the teaching's understood, but the more it's integrated into the body. So if you listen to me 5 years ago or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 years ago, like, it will be different from the way it is now. And it might even sound like it's contradictory, but it's because everything evolves. And so through this human body, it's seen in a different way and it's expressed in a different way. In a way, the core is still the same, that awakening is still the same, but the shift and the evolution and the problems, you begin to see the problems of teaching in specific ways. Maybe you become a little bit allergic after a while of teaching to this. You meet so many people using these teachings in a destructive manner, which is okay. And like people, like seekers, using it in a destructive way against each other and against themselves. And that also affects the way you teach. And so many no people thinking that they're enlightened. So no eyes thinking they're enlightened. Thank you for your response. The childhood bit was relevant too. You always seem to know just what I need. Oh, nice, Amy. I forget what I say about the childhood. Nice, there's no more questions, so I just wait to see if anyone else ask questions. Yeah, you can write to me on Skype. I know I've got red on, but that was only to because I had a confusion with Rob. So Fair Mountain says, thoughts on Kundalini and releasing trauma from the body. Yeah, I don't know so much about Kundalini. I know a lot about the chakras, but and I've had lots of energetic shifts, but I don't know if that's the same as Kundalini awakening. I think that exploring Kundalini and related to trauma is fascinating, and I think that Kundalini can help with that. From my perspective, I too speak about the chakras, but in a very my way. It's not really related. I just find that emotions are in the chakra points, and if you do certain exercises or massages of the body, it can shift the emotions, and also changing your thinking can shift the emotions which are in the chakra points. So if you feel heartbreak, you feel it in the heart. If you feel like you can't express yourself emotionally or whatever, you're in the throat, and solar plexus is about choices, depression, so on. Fear is in the sacral, trust is in the root. Like when you explore your body and you realize these are connected. And trauma is not my expertise, but I can speak about it in relation to what I did, is becoming conscious of the trauma and putting attention into the body and feeling the feelings. However, if the trauma is too big, it's better to go to an expert, because you can get stuck in the trauma and re-traumatize yourself. So also be careful with it. So yeah, especially around fear. There is a great book called Mouth of the Tiger, or Releasing the Tiger, I forget. You can find trauma books on my website under references. Yeah. So to me, there is like 3 major ways in which I've healed trauma. I still have trauma in my body, and I don't know if that's something that will ever go. Some of it is very early childhood, and I feel like it's something you live with and you can expand and transform, but I feel like there is going to be also always the residue of that if you had it in really early childhood. So my way of working with trauma is feeling it in my body and really getting to the root of what it is. So you've got surface feelings, so you might have anger come up, and it might underneath be trauma. So you have anger come up, and then you want to get to the root of what that anger is. So it normally comes into either love or fear, like wanting love or afraid that you're going to die. But it'll go through stages, so don't skip any of those stages. So you might have anger on the surface, and then underneath that there might be jealousy, then underneath that there might be sadness, underneath that it might be grief, and then underneath that there might be wanting love. So like wanting love and safety. So it's just like coming to those feelings in the body and putting attention to them. So trying to, on the human level, put your personal awareness in that feeling and staying with it. So that's one way. And then also speaking it out. So what is it that I want? Ask it questions. What is it you want? Like, I want love, I want care, I want my mummy. Could say all types of things. I want to be safe. So speaking it out. And sometimes you might find there's a repetitive voice that says, I want safety, I want safety, I want safety. And just allow it to come to the surface. Then the next I found really successful was exercise, massage, and physical activities that release. So like Osha chakra meditation, something like that, for example. Acupuncture, massage, Ayurvedic medicine. So something that's physically moving the body, because we store the trauma in our body. Then the next thing I found helpful is being honest in relationships. So a lot of our trauma is about relationship, but not so you re-traumatize yourself, like having wisdom with it. So speaking up how you feel in relationship. So if somebody says something to you and you suddenly, your trauma is triggered, you can feel a vibration of the trauma, it's speaking it out if that relationship is safe. So when it's not blaming the other person, it's like when you said that, I felt fear come up, I felt my trauma come up. And explaining and being very vulnerable with the person. So these are three major ones, but you normally can't always do that by yourself. So I would recommend, seek out a therapist, seek out a non-duality teacher, like seek out someone to work with and to reflect it back with and to be safe with and to learn how to do that. Yeah. Beautiful. Oh, and then the most important part, which I almost forgot, is recognizing that that trauma isn't you, and that those actions and any of that isn't you. Who you are is this empty looking. Nice. Wow, lots of questions now. Hey Ben. Hi Lisa. I'd be interested to hear your understanding of celibacy and spirituality. I tried being celibate many times in my life due to the group's ideology I was studying with, and just ended up being a horny celibate. I have developed a bit of shame concept around it, and the idea to realize I am not this body. I somehow need to stop having sex or masturbation. However, my growing experience of self seems to be deepening despite my body's sexual activity. But I still have this underlying disappointment that I can't get away from bodily pleasures in this way. How can I tell if the thought of the celibacy is true, or the dropping of the concept that it's an obstacle is true? Thanks for any help. Hey Ben. So this is a prime example where I would seek out somebody to work with. Not because you've done anything wrong or not because you've got any shame, because there could be many things going on there. So when you say you stop sexuality and you feel like it's a block, is it because sexuality becomes an addiction for you and becomes addictive, like masturbation to porn? Because that in a way can be negative for the body, mind. It's not hurting enlightenment. Enlightenment is beyond that, but it could be creating like lots of seeking. And to me, that's not going to be undone by restraining. It's like an alcoholic. You're not going to win over the alcohol by restraint. You have to really understand what that addiction's about. I'm not saying you have addiction. I'm just making a hypothesis. Sorry, my dyslexia kicks in. So I'm just speculating as to what might be happening. So you need somebody to guide you through what that addiction is, begin to talk about it and begin to explore it and begin to get to know what your sexuality is, like what your true sexuality is beyond that. Restraint normally doesn't work. It normally ends up with binges. You restrain and then binge, and restrain and then binge. Yeah. You have to really understand what the trigger is. And there is a whole practice called Tantra. So you can use sexuality to release so much from the body and to go really deep into presence as well. Nice, thanks Ben. Here, I'm curious about your take on the horrible mass killing that happened in Norway this week. What are the mechanisms that would lead a person to being so ungrounded, unbalanced, and desperate as to commit such a horrendous act? Seems there must be a deep underlying and untreated trauma there, but how to detect, heal, and prevent these things, and how to view this from a conscious level. I don't really know what happened in Norway too much, but I do remember seeing a brief something that a man took a bow and went around killing people, bow and arrow. I don't know if it was terrorist related or what was happening. I would give I can't say this word tonight, hypothesis as to what happened psychologically. So the fundamental trauma is, or it's not a trauma, but the fundamental issue is the identification with the person, so the belief that who that being is the person rather than the consciousness. And then it is untreated trauma and genetics and family conditioning. So normally what leads someone to do that is it can be mental illness, but maybe mental illness is deeply related to trauma. But more than likely what happens is when they're very young, the way in which their parents or caregivers interact with them is unsafe. And so that person begins to believe that it's its own island and it has to look after itself. So it becomes isolated within itself. And in order to be able to look after itself or by itself, it needs to cut off its emotions, because emotions make you vulnerable. And so what that person's concluded is that I must never be vulnerable around everyone or anyone because they're unsafe. And then I think something physiological happens in the brain where they actually manage to cut off feeling from here downwards. Then maybe what also happens, so it's a combination of things, is their parents don't teach them empathy, or there is something in the brain which can't produce empathy. But more than likely, the parents don't teach them empathy, don't know how to teach them for empathy, and don't know how to deal with that. So the child becomes its own island and is not vulnerable around anybody. And then the parents aren't teaching the child empathy. So when the person becomes its own island, it begins to believe that I am capable of looking after myself. I am totally independent. I don't need anyone to rely on, and I am better than other people. Because I'm better than my parents, like I don't need my parents, it becomes like an arrogance, and it's a self-protection mechanism. Like I don't need them, I am better than them, and it begins to believe that about other people as well. I am better than other people. I do not need other people for my survival. I can survive all by myself, and I can do everything by myself. And then also no empathy as well. What presumably begins to happen in that body-mind mechanism is the only emotion that it experiences is anger, because it's cut off all its emotions. And so the only one that breaks through is anger and frustration, because these are very strong emotions that arise, and also it's like hurting itself. So these are the two emotions that break through. It maybe doesn't actually really experience them as a feeling in the body, but it has actions of anger and thoughts of anger. So it believes it's superior, it believes that it's an own island, it believes that it doesn't need other people for its survival. And then they begin to have anger at other people, because other people, Well, firstly, there's an anger that they're unconscious of, is that they've been hurt by other people. But then there is this anger that people are so much lower, people are so inferior to me, and they create all the problems in this world, and any problem that I have is because of other people, because I'm my own island and I'm totally capable by myself. So then there begins to be strong blame, like I am superior to other people and it's these inferior people that create all the problems. And then as this builds over the years, the anger will become more and more intense, because anger is often a result of suppressed emotions, and frustration and rage is the suppressed emotions, but it's also a result of this superior thinking, like I am better than other people, and lack of empathy. Yeah, you often experience people that aren't in contact with their emotions are having anger outbursts. The other reason is because they're crossing their own boundaries and they're crossing other people's boundaries, but they have no concept of it. And they also, because they feel like a self-island, it's kind of like an attitude like nobody's ever done anything for me. It's like, and it grows, and that thinking will grow and grow and grow. And the more that they feel superior to others, and the more that that anger grows, and it's like a combination, a cocktail, the more that their delusions grow and the grandiosity grows. And so there's that part. And then also most probably what grows is suicidal feelings. I'm not positive about that. This is just a complete guess on a situation like that. So they want to die, but they can't admit that to themselves, because they're going to feel very uncomfortable in the body. And the anger and the frustration is the solar plexus, and there'll also be depression in there, but they aren't conscious of any of this. They're not feeling the body, but it manifests in the brain, these thoughts. So then they'll feel depressed and suicidal, but because they believe they're superior, they can't really acknowledge being suicidal. So they begin to blame and hate other people. So it's kind of like a suicide that they're committing. I know that sounds really weird. And it maybe doesn't sound logical to other people, but they are kind of committing a suicide, because when they do that, they're kind of destroying everything about their life. But it's like a superiority suicide, because it's giving their life meaning. Like, I am saving the world from these terrible people. Like, I am superior, I am better than other ones. It's all inferior people that are making this world awful. They're creating all the problems. And it's like they want to kill themselves, but they can't admit that to themselves because they feel superior. So it's like they kind of do it by thinking I'm superior and better than other people. And they kind of think that they're creating some sort of hero action by killing all these bad people. I know it sounds weird, jumps and leaps. It's more complicated, but that's what I suspect happens, is that trajectory. And it's like a combination. They maybe had like really opinionating or domineering parents or something like that. Like most probably a lot of hatred for the parents arose, a lot of passive aggression, build up of things. Like, so there's all these details that add to it. But fundamentally it will be that I am an island and I can look after myself, and I need no other humans, and I am better than other humans. I do not even need parents to look after me. So it comes from that original trauma of having unsafe parents, feeling like you have unsafe parents. And then the way they deal with it is feeling superior. And then this mass killing tends to be like the hero's way out. I don't think he killed himself, did he? But maybe the police killed him? I don't know. And then there's most probably mental health stuff that goes as well with it. But the superiority is the key. I am superior to others. Yeah, it's so sad. It's so That's terrible. Like such a brutal way to... No, he was not killed. It's an amazing analysis. Feels so accurate. Totally really reminds me of De Maria movie, Taxi Driver. He wasn't killed, so he's still alive. But it is a suicide because it's like he can't go back to his old life. Like his whole life died in that moment. And in a way, now he's cared for by the authorities. It's really ironic. And most probably, like, what he desperately needs is to be cared for. Like, so now he's got complete supervision over his life. He'll most probably never admit that what he did was wrong. He'll always believe it was for the greater good. Unless he's gone into a bit of a psychosis, and then when he comes down, he realizes what he's done. But yeah, it's so brutal to kill people with an arrow. I hope that's a quick way of dying for people. Yeah, I agree. And I kind of like, there's some part of me that feels a little bit repulsed by that energy at times. But there's another part of me that has real compassion for it. Like, they really want to be loved. They don't want to be hated. They kind of have really done the opposite of what they want. Like they were screaming for help. But they just didn't know how to ask for it because they couldn't even admit it. And it's really sad in the end. Like if you could look through their perspective, like their perspective feels right and they feel just. And if you really looked at all their life, like it comes from suffering. And it's all of our responsibility in a way. Because if we want this to stop happening in society, we all have to take responsibility. They are a product of all of us. Like we're like an ants colony, like we all exist through working together. And we're not going to eradicate these people by killing them or by putting them in jail. The way that we begin to deal with this problem is by acknowledging that it's a society problem, and that in order to heal the whole, we have to heal the individuals in that society. Because if we don't heal the individuals, they will traumatize the people around them. And it's like an endless wave. Like he is an effect of other people that were traumatized. So it's like a completely different way of thinking. You know, it's not that he now needs to be punished. He needs to be freaking loved. It's so hard though, because his actions make you want to walk away. But in a way, that's what he's trying to do. I also think that society needs to be currently protected from him. But yeah, he's going to go in prison and then he'll traumatize the people in prison. There's no end to it. It has to be this acknowledgement that they are a result of all of us. They are a movement of the whole. It's not them individually, and they need our help and our support. Yeah, there was this thing that what was it about this tribe? It was so beautiful. Like when somebody lies or cheats in the tribe, like the whole tribe takes on that burden as their own. And there's this whole ritual that's done through it. And they have to do a ritual and they can't leave until, what is it, like all forgiveness or something happens. Yeah. Like it's like they all take collective responsibility for it. It's not like that person's abandoned, like it's like our sins. It's beautiful. It's like a whole different way of looking at it. At the moment, we're always pointing our finger and shaming is the worst that you can do, because that person that thinks it's better, like their nemesis is shame, like feeling ashamed. So shaming them is like adding to it. And can I just say that a lot of people in our society have this dynamic, and most of them don't end up murderers. So what I explained can be a dynamic for a lot of people, like their way of coping with childhood. It's prevalent in our society. And most, like 99.999% don't end up being a murderer. It's like a lot of very specific patterns coming together in order for that to be acted out. Yes. Like, so if you notice that in yourself, don't suddenly start be feeling guilty, oh God, I'm a murderer. That's not the case. Most don't. It's like, yeah, very specific. So there's lots of questions now, but I feel like it's time for me to vermoose about the house. It's like over 2 hours now I've been speaking. But yeah, thanks Thomas for finishing with that question. I can see that you're writing something, so I just read that. Yes, it takes a village to raise a child. This was much more common before. This guy has already been taken care of by the healthcare system. It's understood he's mentally ill. Yeah. Goes into psychosis. Yeah, and I think that Norway has one of the better prison systems in the way that it's seen as rehabilitation rather than just putting somebody in prison for a certain amount of years. Makes me want to cry, actually. Like, yeah. Like just connecting into people's suffering when they feel that desperate and do such horrific acts, and then whole of society shames you and points the finger and hates you, and then a lot of society want to kill you. Thanks for taking the question. Really appreciate it. Yes, it went into psychosis. And then psychosis is an unknowable thing. Like some people think that psychosis or mental health could originate from trauma, and some think it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. But maybe that chemical imbalance is like a family history of trauma which has never been healed. So then it gets carried on. We don't really know though. Yeah, it's so sad. And so sad for all the families of the victims. They're going to be so traumatized now by that. Just sadness all round. It just doesn't need to be like that. All we need to do is just begin to be honest with the way we feel and recognize that that isn't us. That isn't us. Yeah. Okay, my lovelies, it is the end of the talk. Remember to like this talk. Like the other day I was looking at videos on YouTube, and I saw like there was like 2,000 views on a video, and I had something like 50 likes. And I look on other videos, and it's not that I need your likes for approval. It's more that the way that YouTube works is if you like the video, it'll be shared. And if you want these streams to carry on, then part of their benefit is them being shared. So yeah, remember to like the video. I just see a light go on now. I like to like every video that I watch and I like, but I often don't because I'm not signed in. But I do try to go back and like them. Yeah. Anyway, I wish you everything. Everything. Not just one thing or two things, but everything. Yeah. Lots of love. Cheers.